note after note here I'm making here, Katie, but I would say sort of a very sort of reflective, as you expected, speech, but very interesting enough. And you and I kind of talked about this, touched upon the ceasefire right off the top, taking ownership of what unfolded today.
Yes, but what I think stands out of that address is the warning, the stark warning that Joe Biden is delivering to Americans as to what he sees as a pressing threat to American democracy, warning about the concentration of power, warning about wealthy money in elections and the consequences of that, and how the concentration of wealth and power, how that can really pose challenges to the way of the fundamental life in America. One quote I want to pull up, he said, is, "Today, an oligarchy is taking shape in America of extreme wealth, power, and influence that literally threatens our entire democracy, our basic rights and freedoms, and a fair shot for everyone to get ahead." This is the kind of language that Joe Biden is using to warn about what he sees as a threat in the Trump administration and the wealthy people that Donald Trump has surrounded himself. He didn't use anyone by name here, but think of Elon Musk. Think of that, the concentration of wealth, the concentration of power. Also, really in this moment, warning about the concentration of power when it comes to the president, just starkly, boldly calling it out, saying no president should be protected if they do, in fact, commit crimes while in the Oval Office. That, again, is not mentioning Donald Trump by name, but, look what happened in the lead up to January 6th and after January 6th. Jack Smith, the special counsel there, didn't say that he thought that Donald Trump could have been convicted in that case. Right. So even though this was not calling Donald Trump out by name, there were some aspects of legacy, talking about some of the legislation that the Biden administration was able to get through Congress. But really, what's going to stand out from this speech when you look back at it in 10, 15, 20 years is this warning about this moment in American life and American politics, about the concentration of wealth, the concentration of power, misinformation, disinformation, and the rise in influence of social media in this moment, and how all of these things sort of work together and really are creating a significant challenge, at least in this moment, to what we're seeing of what American democracy is. And he really sort of putting Americans at task on this, saying now it is your turn, now it's your time to sort of continue to take, as he uses the analogy of the Statue of Liberty, to take on that torch as we now sort of move into this next phase. But as you point out, Katie, sort of some really direct, poignant points in terms of what to anticipate with this next administration based on what we've already seen with Donald Trump in 2016 and onwards. Also talking about social media not being bullied, but of course, holding the social platform accountable to protect us from that abuse of power. How do you anticipate then Americans, as you're going to sort of be, getting the pulse of how people are now going to take this speech and go with it with just days left of Joe Biden being in office and the transition happening on Monday? This is going to sound perhaps a little jaded, but nothing. Joe Biden is deeply unpopular, and the people that don't like him deeply don't like him. The people that do not support Donald Trump already largely are warning about these kinds of things. But Donald Trump won the election. Donald Trump was campaigning with Elon Musk. Donald Trump was, and other figures of that nature. Is this going to change anything in this moment? I don't think so. The people that do not like Joe Biden do not like him, and they very strongly do not like him in this moment. And the people that do support Democrats and do support Joe Biden, a lot of them are already sort of making these kinds of arguments in this moment. I think that this speech it will have more impact 10, 15, 20, 50 years from now to see if the warnings are accurate.
It certainly will. We'll be watching it indeed as well. Just a few days left, and it's good to have you to unpack it and get your impressions, your perspective from where you are, Katie. CBC's Katie Simpson for us in Washington. Great having you, Katie. Now, I want to bring in Steve Farnsworth, who's also listening in to Joe Biden's speech. Steve is a professor of political science at the University of Mary Washington, also the author of Presidential Communication and Character, White House News Management from Clinton and Cable to Twitter and Trump. He joins us from Fredericksburg, Virginia. Steve, good to have you again. Good to see you.
Glad to be here.
What are your impressions here, listening to what Katie was saying there, sort of as we were breaking down sort of those key moments coming from the speech, warning about disinformation and misinformation. But I want to sort of get your impressions first on what Katie last said when we talked about sort of the impressions that Americans were going to have on this speech. And she basically said it's not going to resonate, that they're not really necessarily going to care. If you don't like Joe Biden, you don't like Joe Biden. What is your take?
Well, I think that's a fair assessment. It's important to recognize that America is a 50-50 country, and the real challenge that any politician has, Democrat or Republican, is convincing people who are not already on your side of much of anything. It's clear that this was one of the more articulate moments for Joe Biden. This last presidential speech was well crafted. I think it's a warning that is very unusual in these valedictory speeches by presidents, but nonetheless, I don't know that it's going to have all that much of an impact, because this is not a new argument in America. The idea that the people who have money and power are constantly getting more and the people who don't have it are constantly getting less, why, that's been a major theme of American politics for decades.
You have watched what happened in 2016. You and I have talked a lot about that transition and then the switch over to what happened in 2020. And now here we are, of course, with another transition, almost flipping the coin, if you will, with Donald Trump coming back into office. How do you anticipate that transition is going to look like this time around in comparison to the conversations, of course, we had, ergo January 6th?
Well, of course, the Democrats do not engage in the kind of violence that Republicans do when they don't win elections. This is a peaceful transfer of power. The 2021 situation was an exception in American history, and one that won't be repeated in any way in the days to come. I think what's going to happen in terms of this transition, there are a couple important things to recognize about what we're going to be seeing next week. First of all, Donald Trump has been president before, so he knows a good deal more about the bureaucracy and how it works. And the key thing that he has done is to select people for his team who are really loyalists first and foremost. They're not always all that qualified or experienced in the areas that they're going to be handling after January 20th, but they are people who will support Donald Trump. First time through, Donald Trump had a lot of trouble with some of his attorney generals, some of his secretaries of state, secretaries of defense. He went through a number of people in those positions because they didn't always agree with Trump, and they were sometimes forceful in their objections. You won't be seeing nearly as much of that this time around. Donald Trump has much greater control, not only of the White House, but the cabinet secretaries and even the Republicans in Congress seem more inclined to do what Donald Trump wants now, given the composition of today's Republican Party compared to 4 years ago or 8 years ago.
Yeah, so we're sort of seeing this, as some have coined, sort of Trump 2.0, if you will. He's kind of coming in, I guess, with more of that experience, more of that ammunition. So how do you anticipate as we move into this next 4 years of his presidency?
Well, I think we could take Donald Trump at his word that he's really going to be focusing a great deal on issues like immigration, border security, issues of tariffs and trade. I mean, this is a big issue. Both of these issues are significant issues with respect to Canada, of course. You're looking at a situation where the Canadian side is going to simply have to tighten up the border in an aggressive way to keep Donald Trump at bay, and that's what he's going to be looking for. It's going to create significant challenges, I think, for countries around the world dealing with a president who is not one to follow the norms of previous presidents. But that's what he was elected to do, to be more of a change agent than more of the same.
And he has talked about wanting to get things running right from day one, moments after he is inaugurated, that planning about 100 executive orders. And you mentioned there immigration and border, that's sort of some of the areas around there. We know tariffs is the other one. He's even commented, I think it was just a couple of days ago on his social media, about creating an external revenue agency. What are you going to be watching for in terms of what he wants to sign off immediately? And of course, here in Canada, we're watching very closely indeed.
Well, certainly we'll start with the tariffs. I think that's going to be something that's going to be happening right out of the box on day one. You're looking at a tighter border. You're looking at greater barriers to entry for people coming into the United States, particularly from Muslim majority countries. We saw that, of course, in the first days of 2017 when he first became president. You're looking at an environment where Congress, even Republicans in Congress with Republican majorities, are going to be somewhat scrutinizing some of Trump's ideas, see if they can be amended and adjusted a little bit. And that's going to push Trump, I think, in the direction of a lot of executive orders. What Donald Trump is going to want to do is put a lot of executive orders out very quickly to get points on the board, so to speak. You'll see efforts to tighten restrictions relating to abortion. You'll see issues respecting border access. You'll see those kinds of things come out in executive orders very quickly. Things that will endear him to Christian conservatives, things that will endear him to the people who voted for him, who are very concerned about the border, very concerned about how America may be losing out in the global economy, and that seeing that Trump's argument of tariffs as the solution to that problem is something that they want to back.
We'll be watching everything very closely as it continues to unfold. We know Joe Biden still has a couple more speeches, but this being, of course, the main address to the nation, as, of course, now we lead up into Inauguration Day on Monday. Steve, thank you so much for this. It's always a pleasure. Steve Farnsworth, professor of political science at the University of Mary Washington.